This evening, I have great pleasure to introduce Malin Rosenkvist, who is an international development expert. She's a passionate advocate for gender equality. She has a degree in international politics and development from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. She's a Director of Fundraising Communications at Microloan Foundation, which is an organisation that Alan and myself have been involved with, in his case, to a great extent, and to my case, much lesser extent, but we find it a very, very exciting organisation. Malin is working to alleviate poverty and empower women living in Malawi, Zambia and Zimbabwe. She has 15 years of experience in the international development sector, with a special focus on education, gender and poverty alleviation in sub-Saharan Africa. So she knows what she is talking about. She has first-hand experience of things she's going to be speaking about, and I really look forward to it. And I would like to welcome her now to the stage, such as it is.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here, and it's good to see everyone. Hopefully we'll have an even bigger audience when everyone comes back from their holidays and Easter breaks. So as Jane said, I have been working in the international development sector for 15 years. At the moment, I work with Microloan Foundation. It's a social microfinance institution, and we basically work with some of the poorest women in Malawi, Zambia and Zimbabwe and help them start businesses to build resilience against climate change, to make sure that they can address food insecurity and basically find a way out of poverty. So I am by no means an expert in climate change. However, I have been seeing how it directly impacts the lives of the very, very poorest people in the world. So I will be talking a little bit about the intersection between poverty and gender and climate change. And I'll also be looking at introducing you to a woman that I met a few years back, actually, and how life has kind of been impacted for her. So let me share my screen and begin. Here we go. So this is how climate change is impacting the lives and the homes of the women that Microloan Foundation supports and the women that I work with. This is a picture from 2019 after Cyclone Idai hit the southern parts of Malawi. This is the home of one of our clients, and as you can see, there isn't very much left of it. And in this adversity, the women that I work with are truly inspiring in the way of how they actually deal with these constant crises. What I want to talk to you about is a little bit about poverty, just to set the scene for you to understand why this happens, why a home looks like this after a disaster strikes. So first of all, poverty, it's people who live in poverty. They are the ones who are most likely to be hit by climate change and the impacts of climate change. And more than half of the world's poorest people are living in sub-Saharan Africa. Before COVID hit, we saw poverty declining everywhere in the world, which is great news, apart from the fact that it was declining everywhere in the world apart from sub-Saharan Africa. So if you look at the graph, you've got the green line at the top, which basically shows poverty based on population in sub-Saharan Africa. And you can see that that's increasing over time from 1990 to 2030 and the expectations for the future. Whereas all the other colors, you see poverty decreasing. So the majority of the poor people live in rural areas. and women are more likely to live in poverty than men. This is also sits directly linked to the fact that people who live in rural areas are more likely to be impacted by climate change, and women are also more vulnerable to climate change. When we talk about poverty, it can get a little bit confusing about what we actually mean. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So what does it actually mean to survive on less than $1.25 a day? And the reason I talk about $1.25 a day is that that's one of the extreme, that's the extreme level of poverty. So if you are living on little more than £1 a day, every day is a struggle. You will have to make really, really tough decisions, particularly when it comes to what in Malawi is called the hungry season. So that's the period before the harvest season of the staple food, which is maize in April. During that period, your family will go hungry. You will have to make decisions on whether you spend the little money that you have on food or sending your children to school. So the chances are your children won't get an education. And we see this with a lot of the women that we work with. They are illiterate and they have very, very low levels of education because it's intergenerational poverty. Food shortages also causes malnutrition, which causes a range of health issues. And the problem is these families are not able to afford to access healthcare. The life expectancy for the poorest, and that's based on Malawi, the poorest segment of the population is only 54 years. So I think one of the things that we forget and that we kind of take for granted is that we have a structure around us that supports us. And if you don't have access to any finance, you don't have access to savings, when disaster strikes, that basically means you are left on your own and you are left without anything. And I think one of the really hard-hitting facts on this slide is the fact that when you live in extreme poverty, 1 in 13 children will die before their 5th birthday. And that obviously is absolutely harrowing. And poverty is something that hits both men and women, of course. But when we look at the intersection between poverty and gender and climate change, we can see that, you know, anyone who works in agriculture and who lives in a rural area, of course, will be impacted by climate change and is likely to live in poverty. But why is it that women are more likely to be poor than men? And there are really two key reasons there. The first one is women are more likely to be poor, as we've said. And the second is that women are more likely to be reliant on natural resources in their local community for their livelihood. So let's start with the poverty. So women are more likely to be poor because of traditional gender roles, a lot of the things that we're seeing across the globe. But in the communities that I work in, when I say traditional gender roles, it is on a level where it becomes very difficult for women to access education, for example. They can't access employment. Sometimes these inequalities are actually enshrined in law. So if we look at asset and land ownership, if a husband passes away, the wife in some of these communities in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe will not inherit the land or the home. She would have to leave everything that she's built up together with her husband, and that will go to the husband's family. So again, if you don't own assets, and if you can't own the land and you can't own property, it basically means that you can never become part of the financial system to find your way out of poverty. And the final thing is, and the reality is, that 75% of caring responsibility and unpaid domestic work
We've lost the connection, Malin.
savings so that you can build the resilience to deal with natural disasters or the disasters that are caused by climate change, like food insecurity. So now I want to introduce you to Maritha, this lovely lady. Can you see her picture? I hope so. So I met Maritha in 2016. She is a female farmer in Malawi. She lives in a small village in the sort of southern central parts of Malawi. And when I met her in 2016, she had joined Microloan 1 year previously. She's a mother of 5, and before she had access to support from Microloan, she was struggling to feed her family. She's been growing maize pretty much all her life, and her parents grew maize as well. So there's a tradition of farming, but she just didn't know how to farm effectively, and she did not have the finances to actually invest in fertilizer or in seed that were strong enough to survive. And also the fact that she didn't know how to farm meant that the soil was depleted. She'd grown maize year on year on year without any crop rotation, which then means that there wasn't very much to get out of the soil anymore. As a result, her 2 oldest children actually had stunted growth and were in quite poor health. One of her children got malaria, and it was a very close call. Thankfully, he made it through. But even when she was growing, the little harvests that she would get from her farm, there were real challenges with her selling that, because she did not have the same bargaining power as her male counterparts. And this becomes a real issue, because you have people who comes from wholesalers to villages and basically purchase the produce from women and men in the local communities. And they just generally offer a lower price for women. So again, this becomes a real issue. Of course, she was a single mother. So in terms of taking care of the family, she had help from her family to look after her children. But, you know, it was really tricky for her to find time to actually look after the land. So when she joined Microloan, she got access to conservation farming training, and she got access to ways to understand of what can she do when, for example, when you have the really heavy rains that often come in December or January in Malawi. What can you do to mitigate the risk of the natural disaster or the heavy rains that comes? And the fact that she was taught that she could grow shrubbery, and she could try to, you know, after a few years, if she grow the trees that would actually bind the soil, crop rotation. So she started growing soya as well as maize, and making sure that that's naturally creating nutrients for the soil. She was taught how to produce her own organic fertilizer. And she also got access to a small loan, which means that she could access a better quality seed. And this basically meant that in 2017, she had doubled the actual yield that she got, which was great. And then you get COVID-19 hitting. Well, first of all, you had Cyclone Idai that hit in early 2019. Thankfully, her area was not that hard hit by that cyclone. But COVID had an impact on her business. And this is, again, we've seen when disaster strikes, whether it's a natural disaster or it's a pandemic, it impacts this demographic unevenly. So the restrictions were more of an actual issue than COVID itself. And we saw this across the 3 countries, that food insecurity became a major issue, because at the same time, you had the hungry season, and then people were not able, when they got the harvest, they weren't actually able to sell their produce. And a lot of produce were actually wasted because it's perishable. So I think overall, we can say that these female farmers in Southern Africa face a lot of challenges. And on top of everything, they are dealing with extreme weather conditions. So I'm going to show you a video from a month and a half ago, 6 weeks ago, that one of my colleagues sent me. Let's see. I'm hoping you can see this. So this is a road that has been completely washed away. The woman is one of Microloan Foundation's clients, and the man is one of our loan and training officers who are helping some of our clients cross the road. These women are being displaced as a result of increasingly frequent extreme weather conditions in Malawi. At the moment, these kind of floods happen almost every year. And if we look at the big picture of sub-Saharan Africa, we know that glaciers will melt. And in Southern Africa, the rainfall will reduce as a result with about 20%. So this is going to get us to a position where the poorest people are facing even worse levels of displacement, of food insecurity, and of general levels of poverty. So I know I'm painting an extremely bleak picture here, but there are good things happening. And I do have to say that the women that I meet and the communities that I work with are truly inspiring. These women have grit, they have determination, they have drive, and they just need to be given the opportunity to build safe and secure lives and livelihoods for themselves. And they need to be educated and supported in their ventures to actually learn about how they can mitigate the risks. Because there isn't a lot of support for these women. No one really thinks about the fact that these women also need to learn how to look after the soil and look after their community, not just for themselves and for their communities, but for the planet as well. So, Microloan Foundation has been operating in Malawi for nearly 20 years. And the way that we support female farmers, and all of the women that you see in these images are Microloan entrepreneurs. So what we do is basically make sure that we reach the very poorest women, because there's not a lot of other organizations that are able to go into the really rural communities, but we've got a network of really well-educated local individuals who can support these women and who understand the challenges that they face. We provide finance, so really small startup loans. So even if you're very poor, you can still access a little bit of money that you can then invest in your farming business. The training and support in terms of financial literacy and business training is really important. Making sure that they can say no to that guy who comes up and tries to buy their produce for a cheaper price, and actually say, no, I can get a better price somewhere else, to stand up for themselves. It's also building that confidence. Savings is absolutely essential when it comes to addressing poverty and building a savings behavior. You can imagine what it's like for women who has never had extra money. So the whole concept of saving is actually alien to them. So we do training where we basically help them visualize their goals and help them build resilience for the future for when disaster strikes. Conservation farming training is really important. And I do also, we're actually today, hot off the press is the fact that we've actually just secured funding for the institution to get a consultant to come in and start a project where we can help make sure that not just Microloan Foundation as an organization, but the women that we're financing, make sure that they are ESG compliant. And basically what that means is that they are environmentally and socially responsible, and that their small micro businesses are doing good for their society, their community, as well as for the planet. So yeah, and I think if we can get this right, and if we can continue making sure that there's an awareness around the challenges that really poor communities face, and that women in particular face, you can see the quote, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization think that we can reduce hunger make 100 to 150 million fewer people go hungry in the world, which I think would be quite an achievement. So here we go. What can you do to help? This is my last slide. So I think, and I'm sure a lot of people tell you this when you do these, when you attend these talks, but every little thing that you can do to reduce your own footprint is a step in the right direction. And I think looking at ESG compliant investments is always something that we should consider, because money talks, you know, not just investments, but also the products that we purchase. Bringing it closer to the communities that we work with, staying informed about underreported crises and communities that are impacted by the crisis and by food insecurity and by poverty. I would recommend going to Relief Web. They report on crises that are underreported on. And actually in 2021, CARE International did a report on the most underreported crisis in the world, and Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe were all on that list. And that a lot of those crises are relating to climate change, food insecurity, and gender-based violence, actually. So overall, I would say spread the word. Follow Microloan Foundation on social media. Take a look at, like I said, at Relief Web. Share the links so that people learn about these things and what communities are facing. And of course, I wouldn't be the Director of Fundraising if I didn't ask you to make a donation to Microloan. So yeah, a donation of it only costs about between 12 and 14 pounds to provide agricultural training for a woman over the whole growing season, of the whole maize growing season, which is about 6 months. So that's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Big round of applause, even if it's not heard. Terrific, Malin. Thank you very much indeed. What I feel came out of that very, very much was to make the whole story come alive by telling us the story of a particular woman. I know she's representative of many other women, but it really helped me to remember what it's like in Malawi, and to really be able to imagine how hard people are hit when you've got no savings and nothing to back you up, and no health insurance and nothing like that. You know, one bad harvest and that's it, you're completely stuck. So thank you very much indeed for telling us that story. And I'm sure that people will have some questions. We'll just give them a moment to think what their questions are. I will, of course, put all of the information that you've given us, including a link to Microloan. And so what is Relief Web? Tell me a bit more about that.
So Relief Web is actually a website that we use quite a lot in the international development sector. So basically it's reporting on food security.
We've lost your link.
Will have seen the floods in South Africa. It reports on crises across the world, basically. And it gives all the information in terms of from reliable resources. So it's not just what's being fed into mainstream media necessarily. It is, you know, just information for international development professionals, really.
Okay, so when I publish the recording of this talk, I'll also put those sorts of things up on our website so people can find them, and I'm sure they will.
Yeah, so, that sounds great.
So has anybody got a question they want to ask by putting their hand up, or would anybody like to put a question on the chat? Let me just get so I can see everybody. Anybody want to wave their hand, or if you don't want to show yourself, put a question on the chat for me. I'm sure Alan's got some questions for you.
Could unmute myself.
Yeah,
I
good
see
idea.
So I think my question, Malin, is that I'm aware that in sub-Saharan Africa, drought in particular, but climate crises of one sort and another that lead to harvest failures have been a regular occurrence for many years. And I seem to remember there was a statistic about one summer in 10 was usually a complete disaster. But have the women or have the communities seen those statistics worsening over the last few years?
This is a really tricky question because it becomes a question about that the climate deniers would call, is it weather or is it climate? Over the past 15 years, I can tell you that I have seen a lot more failed crops, not fully failed harvests, but failed crops. There are more floodings, there is definitely a more regular occurrence in that's impacting the poorest communities. That's not to say, I don't have data on basically saying this has happened more in the last 15 years than it has done in the previous 15 years. But there certainly is, if you look at how regularly it has been flooding in particular communities in Malawi, it's almost every year now.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
And we had the worst food insecurity in Southern Africa. I think that was in 2016. We had the worst food insecurity since famines in the 80s, you know. So it's critical, I would say.
So that's the evidence of what you see, as you say, without having necessarily statistics you can put up on the screen. Good, get bored of statistics.
Yeah.
I have a question from Rosie. She says, could you tell us more about the way ESG principles are going to be implemented with microloan recipients, clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to bear in mind is that, so this is the first project of its kind with microfinance clients in Malawi. So initially, what we're looking at is risk for the clients and reducing risk for the clients. And that basically means that if you're engaging in something that's harmful for society or harmful for the environment, that's going to increase your risk. It's just not going to be good for you, not in the short term and certainly not in the long term. So that's what we're going to look at. And basically, that's also the selling point for the women, because you've got to remember, if a woman, for example, is making her money from tobacco farming, we need to give a pretty good reason why we feel that she should divert into something else when tobacco is a cash crop that gives a good yield and she's struggling to feed her family. So for us, it's just making sure that the training element for the women, getting that right is absolutely essential for us to get that ESG element right. Yeah.
That's a really the tobacco example is such a good one, because I have to say, if I was selling tobacco very successfully and making some money out of it, I would be quite reluctant for somebody to say, oh yes, but that's unethical.
Yeah, especially, and then if you think about tobacco alongside tea and a little bit of coffee, but tobacco is by far the biggest export product that Malawi has.
Is it?
Agricultural export, yeah.
Okay, so that is a big issue.
It is a big issue, but the Malawi government has actually come on board, and they are also moving in the right direction. We just have to be mindful of making sure that the right direction is not at the expense of the poorest.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so another question. Could you explain the key reasons why sub-Saharan Africa has worsening poverty while Asia and Latin America have seen a reduction?
The key reason is that population growth is so fast in sub-Saharan Africa. So the reduction, I've got to say, there's a lot of really good things happening in us reaching the sustainable development goals and reducing poverty. You know, there is positive things to say about this. It's just that the population growth in Africa is higher than the reduction of poverty. You know, the speed at which the population is growing is faster than the speed of the poverty reduction, basically. So that's the reason. That's the key reason.
Would I be right in saying that educating women is one of the ways in which you can reduce population growth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there is statistics, I'm sure, for anyone who's read about Africa, have read the statistics about educating a girl up to secondary degree level reduces the number of children that she will have with half. So there is a lot of research that has been done on that. Absolutely. I have to say, when it comes to population growth, and when I look at having conversation and sitting down with women that I meet and talking about, gossiping about husbands and talking about life in general, you know, and talking about, you know, meeting. I remember I met two young women in Malawi, actually, 3 years ago, and they both had 2 children each, and one of them was 22, the other one was 24, and they said, you know, we don't want more than 3 children each. And I said, well, how are you going to manage that? You've got a lot of years to go to build a family still, you know, how are you going to manage that? And they both went, oh no, I've got an implant. So that they are managing that, and it is starting to become high status to have a lower number of children, whereas 15 years ago, when I was living in Uganda, it was very high status. It was all God willing. The more children you had, the more of a man you are, the more of a woman you are. It's high status to have a lot of children, whether that is slowly changing, because it's an indicator of moving into the middle class, of having a lower number of children.
That's really interesting. So, and an implant is obviously a good way of making sure that, you know, your husband doesn't have to remember to.
Yeah, exactly. So there's also, you know, and there are loads of great organizations that are doing family planning work out there, and it's effective. You know? Brilliant.
It's good to hear about some young women like that who have got the message. And actually, I found that a very exciting moment for listening to you talking about chatting to these young Malawian women, because that's how you get under their skin and find out what they're really like, what they're thinking, and how you can best help them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So do you do that with an interpreter?
Initially, I do that with an interpreter, and then slowly but surely they usually get comfortable and confident enough to speak English, on a broken kind of level sometimes. But yeah, it's much better when you can get usually it's a colleague anyway, so we chat together, you know. But yeah, it's so much better when you can have a direct conversation, even if the English is, you know, a little bit all over the shop. That's all good, you know?
Yeah, of course, because the little laugh starts to come in, and you start to get the little twinkle in the eye, don't you, if you're not having to go through somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another question, with so much potential demand for microloan support, how do you decide which women to help?
That is a really, really good question, because it's difficult. And the way that we select the women is basically not us selecting them. The women come together in groups of 5. So we go into a village and say, right, these are the services that we offer. And generally we tap into the local structures. So traditional leaders or village chiefs will invite us. And then we basically, the call to action is, if you're interested in starting a small business and want training and support from Microloan, then You need to speak to your community and your husband and other women in the community and come together as a group. And then you choose, as a woman, you choose who you want to be in that group with, because they are jointly responsible for each other's loans. And this is a way for us to mitigating risk. And this is the reason we don't have to take collateral or any security on the loans, which means that the loans are open to even the poorest women, because the women will select the women that they trust. Obviously, that means that some women who are not trusted by other community members may not be able to access the loans. But the reality is that we cannot provide microfinance loans and training to everyone. So this is a way for us to make it as accessible as we possibly can.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that when I was there, that sometimes there was a woman who the group didn't want to join them because they knew her well.
Yeah,
And they
exactly.
knew that they didn't want to trust her. And that's something you can't possibly know, but they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, we want the loans to be repaid so we can give the loan, either give the woman another loan so she can grow her business, or that we can give another woman a loan. So they all ultimately, we want it to be a revolving loan book to maximize impact.
Yeah. I would really appreciate it if you could just spend 2 or 3 minutes explaining a little bit more about how the microloan system works. I went to Malawi and saw these groups of women having meetings and working with each other. How can you just help the rest of our audience who haven't seen it for themselves to understand how this works and why it works so well?
Yes, absolutely. So remember the slide where I said women who are living on $1.25 a day. So basically, it starts with microloan staff, which are local staff who speak the local languages. In Zambia, there are 52 of them. So it's a good thing that I don't have to learn them. So they go out into the village and basically connect with the local traditional leaders and call a group meeting. In that group, a village meeting. In that village meeting, you have women, you have men, you have children, you have farm animals. Everyone is in the village, usually under a tree. And there we present what we do as an organization, the fact that we offer training and financial literacy, support, mentoring, and small loans. This is something that the call to action is then talk to everyone in your family and to your community, and then we will come back and then you can form a group. Before the group gets access to a loan, and there's 5 women in each group, before they get access to a loan, they will take part in 2 months worth of training. Because we can't just give someone a loan, even if it's a loan of just £25, which is our startup loans, because if you're struggling to feed your family, you will take that loan and you will feed your children. That's what you're going to do, right? And as bizarre as it sounds, we don't want them to do that because we want them to build something sustainable for the future. So therefore, when they've completed the training, that's when they get access to a loan. So we disperse a loan. In Zambia and Zimbabwe, we disperse a loan via mobile money. So they get an electronic payment. We are introducing that in Malawi, which is really exciting, but otherwise we provide them the funds in cash and we help them open a bank account for the group. This is a big thing for women who've never been allowed into a bank because they're too poor. Just the pride for them to walk into a bank and say, I have an account here, is something that really builds their confidence. So once they get access to the loan, part of the training that they go through talks about building a business plan, how to manage a budget, help support from the other women on what type of business to run, because the other women will know the local market and the women themselves know what's needed and where the gaps in the market are. Once that happens, then they will set up their businesses and very quickly they will start to generate an income and start making a profit. Most of the women invest in stock or they invest in their farm or they buy produce. So for example, they'll buy dried fish and sell it at a higher price in the local market, or they'll buy tomatoes, so they'll grow tomatoes and they'll go to the nearest town and sell it at a higher price. That's what they do. And then they repay their loans, and they make repayments every 2 weeks. And they get continued training and support throughout the process. Because you've got to remember, if you're surviving on £1 a day, you've got to make sure you start making money really quickly. And these are the kind of really basic enterprises that the women engage in. And then once they've completed their loan cycle and repaid their loan, they can choose to take out a new loan if they want to grow their business or if they want to invest in something else. So that's how it works.
Great, thank you. Rose has asked another question. How much does increased money at individual female farmer level translate into sending more girls to school for longer? I'm interested whether boys' education is still favoured first.
It is favoured first in most cases. Boys' education is, but I think I have statistics on this somewhere. We do know that, I'm going to have a quick look. I think I've got that somewhere. I don't have the data. Maybe I don't have the data on me, but the response is basically, we know that boys are favored to go to school still, but we're also seeing a big increase in the number of girls that are able to access education as a result of the increased household income. The number one priority in Zambia for our micro entrepreneurs is education. It is what they all talk about. And in Malawi, where you've got very, very low literacy rates and very low education rates, the key priority, the top priority is food, because Malawi is poorer than Zambia. So food insecurity is more of an issue for more months of the year than it is in Zambia. But right up there with nutritious food for their family is education for their children. It is definitely a top priority. The problem is for female farmers, when it's harvest season, the chances are that they will have to pull their children out of school to help them with the farming activities. And that is still a problem for both boys and girls.
Mm. It's hard for us to really take on board that, you know, the idea that you can't make a living without taking your kids out of school.
Mm. Yeah.
Terrific, Malin. You've filled us with a huge amount of information, and certainly in my case, renewed interest and enthusiasm to support. So fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. We will definitely have as much information as we can muster, and please send us that thing you couldn't find as well, and we'll make a web page after the event of your talk with information that you've given us and make it accessible to everybody. So not only the people here, but also the people who visit the website after the event will be able to find it. Anybody here who is not already on my mailing list, and I'm not sure that there is anybody, but just in case, the web address is there above my head. If you visit the web, you will be able to find out how to register, and then you will automatically be told about all our other talks. Now, before we go, I have a request from Ian, who is one of our most regular and most faithful supporters. He would like to ask a question about repair cafes. But just before he does, can we have a really huge thank you for Malin, a big round of applause.
Yeah, well done. Great talk.
Thank you very much. It's great to chat to you all.
Ian, over to you.
Coincidentally, we have a lady from coming to visit us in my Rotary Club on Monday to talk about her charity development, which is in northern Uganda, called Seeds for Development. Her name is Alison Hall. So she's coming to tell us how they're getting on. She's progressed beyond the seeds now doing schools there. So it's a great success. Yes, my question, thank you. It was just in case there was anybody on the meeting this evening who has knowledge of a local repair cafe or somebody who is involved with it. We're trying to establish one in Godalming, where I live, and we're running into a problem with insurance. Insurers having worries about product liability risk. So even though repair cafes work on the basis that everybody gives their time for free and there's no commercial transaction occurring. So it's just in case anybody on the call had knowledge of a local repair cafe that could put me in touch with somebody there to talk about it.
You want to just explain what a repair cafe is?
Oh yes, sorry. I guess there's one of these things that you get to know about and then you assume everybody knows about them. They're not that uncommon. There's an international foundation established in The Hague by a lady in 2010, her idea. And there are now about 2,300 registered repair cafes, mostly in Europe. They're basically social activities where people who've got broken things come together with people who've got skills or an enthusiasm for mending things. And they take a coffee together whilst working together to mend whatever is broken. And it can be absolutely everything from a lawnmower or a clock to a piece of china or the proverbial toaster, I suppose. It's just that there's no money to exchange. People just help each other. And it's, in terms of environment, it's very important because it's the first and major step on the road to a circular economy. We just don't throw things away anymore. But we're a long way from achieving that, of course. So there are plenty around. I think something like 180 in Britain and Ireland. And we've got a couple locally that I'm talking with, but I'm anxious to get in touch with a few more to talk about the detail.
Okay, great. So if anybody does know of one, let us know on Tufop Mail if you want to, or perhaps Ian wants to put his email address in the chat.
I can put I already sent my email address to Rosie actually, but I'm very happy that you pass it on, or I can put it in the chat now so people can record it if they want.
Can you see, Ian, that this one has been put in the chat?
No, it was just to Rosie. It was a request from Rosie, so I sent because she knows of somebody.
No, but there's a link to Epsom Repair Cafe that's been put in the chat.
All right, that one I haven't seen.
And Sustainable Amersham. I will save the chat and make sure that you get all of these.
Okay, that's fine.
And there's definitely one in Cheshire as well. So there are a few coming forward.
Oh.
Great. Okay.
Thank you
So much for coming, everybody. Thank you very much, Malin. Yeah, and for the little explanation about repair cafes, thank you, Ian. It's all good stuff. And we'll see you again. 18th of May is the next one, but I will be sending through a circular about what that's all about, obviously. Lovely to see you all.
Thanks. Thanks, Malin.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Malin. Bye.